think we're now streaming live. Hello. Hi. I'm John from Broadsheet. You're very welcome to Tomorrow Tonight, which is this morning, because our guest goes to bed at about 7 p.m.
No. Look, you're altering this all of the time. And last night, of course, I went to bed at 10 o'clock. So, okay. I mean, I think your viewers might get slightly stale of the joke, but anyway.
Okay. Well, the early to bed person is David Langwallner, a human rights lawyer. David is going to preview today's papers, today's front pages, and we're also going to talk about his column on the site yesterday, which was very interesting, based on Émile Zola's famous J'accuse letter. Quite a response to that, David.
Yeah, it's mostly very, very favourable, but it stoked up a controversy. I've been meaning to have it published for a number of years, but it's a kind of, we might get to it later, it's a summation of what I think is rotten in the Kingdom of Denmark, or rather Ireland. It's a summation of all that I think has gone wrong.
Yeah. You packed a lot in there.
Yeah, I mean, it's a condensing and crystallization of lots of other things I've written in a kind of form which I'd like to discuss later. Let's deal with this pragmatic.
Okay. Saturday's papers, vaccine target of 1.25 million doses, very challenging, admits Martin.
Well, I think when you use a phrase like very challenging, it's yet another of these buzzwords and sanitizations of discourse that destroy everything. When he says very challenging, he means we're not going to make it. It's like a caption, you should translate it. He doesn't think that they're going to actually get to that vaccine total, and that is therefore a way of placating and emolliating the fact that human misery continues for a considerably longer period of time.
And the British are doing much better.
Yes, it has been, they've had a very good record, and there has been a noticeable, I've been live in court or going to courts in person much more frequently recently.
Have you?
And there's been a noticeable, discernible calmness now. People are getting calmer. The Brits, in all fairness to them, it's one of their greatest qualities, this stiff upper lip thing. I know it's like Colonel Bogey in the bridge over the River Kwai, and sometimes people ridicule it. And there is something at times a little ridiculous about it. But on the other hand, it is why it has been a great nation for thousands of years. It is that sense of perseverance. The show must go on. And let's remain calm. Let's not all freak out. And in very trying conditions, and I've seen some awful things in the last year or so, they have maintained their sang-froid.
Yeah. Well, I think we've been very, very, I mean, the Irish people generally have been extremely stoic. And
yes, and Fintan O'Toole warns against that in the Irish Times today. He warns against stoicism, and I think he's right. Stoicism is a good way in philosophical terms of coping with life, and not getting things out of proportion, not overreacting to a setback, keeping a modest dispensation, and so on. But the problem with it is it leads to excessive compliance. And the Irish people have been far too, something we'll deal with, obedient and compliant in the chronic levels and awful levels of the mismanagement of this and the destruction of their livelihoods and income structures and liberties. And so there's a real danger in stoicism. You shouldn't have to endure everything. If you need people like Elie Wiesel or Primo Levi on the endurance levels in, say, for example, concentration camps, and it's an analogy that's often misused, but we're dealing with a situation where peoples are being dehumanized in a slightly different way. Resistance is also important, and I think it is time now to resist and dissent.
Okay, but to the resistors then, who might get arrested, who might get...
Well, there's a projected in the papers, obviously the Irish Examiner is very concerned about this as well, because there's a rally in Cork. Is it today or tomorrow?
It's today, in fact.
It's today.
Yeah.
And my mother is a Cork woman, or was a Cork woman.
As is mine.
I've lived in Cork, and everyone knows the freewheeling, anarchic nature of a certain level of Cork people. They're not. If there's one sector of Ireland which doesn't like authority, it's them. So one senses this is going to be an absolute disaster. It's a very complex set of issues, I think. I believe at one level that people should, like Sumption, have to express their views and dissent and protest against a dehumanizing lockdown. Okay. Obviously, there is a concern that certain extremist groups, particularly extreme right-wing groups, seem to be in control of these things, or at least, but that is hearsay or suggestions, sometimes firm information, and so on. Yeah. But it is a major concern, and one understands the police's point of view in relation to that. And one also, there's a overlay of civil liberties legislation and cases dating back from Humphreys v. O'Connor and so on, about the police's right to control something that will end up in a riot and a fray, a public disorder situation. They're legislative and common law case law on that. And they have, within that panoply of powers, they have rights to control and regulate to some degree incidences which will lead to public disorder, riot or fray. Whether they can ban it, I don't think that's feasible. But they can anticipate and redirect, as they did in the marches in Dublin some years ago about Bloody Sunday. They redirected people and moved them from place to place. Cork's much smaller, of course, so that creates its own policing structure and policing problem. I read something to the effect that they are dummy running this, the cops. Yeah. That what they're doing is that they're working out a strategy for this Cork thing to see if it's going to work in the Dublin thing. But I'm trying to be even-handed and balanced about it, because in a sense, and you might find this odd for me to say this, my heart goes out to the ordinary copper in these circumstances, because they're being put in a frontline situation. And in a situation like that could get out of control, all sorts of things can happen. You never know how dangerous this could be.
Well, David, I think the vast majority of the people who will be at these protests are completely peaceful.
Oh, I'm sure that's
completely peaceful. The vast majority
of people will be peaceful. Yeah. And you cannot stop, in the present climate, people's right to protest, to demonstrate, in the light of the fact that their livelihoods are being destroyed, their income structure is going, their right to peaceful enjoyment of liberty and movement, in what many people think is a vastly overstated crisis. The Irish response has been disproportionate. The British response, in its own cack-handed up and down way, has had a greater degree of, read something about Jonathan Sumption for you, measure for measure, proportionate incremental responses. It's almost as if the government want to be the best boy in the school of social cleansing, and the best boy in the school of this terrible Irish 100% solution, results-driven culture.
David, your camera is gone.
Oh, all right. This terrible. Start video.
We just lost your.
Yeah. Well, I'm trying to get it back, but.
Okay. Okay, just give that a second then.
Okay.
No, we've lost you totally, David.
Can you hear me?
We're back.
Yeah, well, I just think, sorry. I was saying this best boy in the school thing.
Yeah, that was back in 2008 as well, wasn't it? I mean.
Well, yeah, but you don't want to get 100% unless you're looking at what the 100% is. One has to be proportionate and moderate and look at the human condition in this.
But I don't
We're
understand
going,
it.
we're going to be living with viruses to come and mutants of viruses to come. We're just going to have to develop work patterns to enable us to deal with that. And locking people down in this way is unacceptable. So one understands the culture of dissent. And Fintan O'Toole's point of over stoicism or over compliance.
Yeah, well, over compliance is not over stoicism. I mean, there's a, and to resist these things, you're going to get arrested. You're going to be called a neo-Nazi. You're going to be.
Well, I mean, that's another consideration. That's another consideration. I had to advise someone about whether and to what extent they should go on the march. And my advice, prudentially, was no.
What, to the Cork march?
Yeah, somebody was considering, or to the Dublin march.
The Dublin one last week.
And I was saying to them, I think it is a situation. I don't want to be alarmist, but it could get out of control.
Okay, well, bread and pizza prices now set for Brexit rise.
Right. Well, I'm fond of a pizza, and I have a loaf of bread every day in that kind of French way, so that depresses me greatly.
Okay, well, I think this is the food supply. I think is the next thing that's going to be hit. Scramble to avoid McEntee having to resign as minister due to maternity leave, without having to resign temporarily or stand aside when her baby is born.
I don't. It obviously, if you're a young mother, in the earlier stages, the child is totally dependent on you to some extent, and it is natural and important that she has a measure of contact. But of course, she is also in a very critically responsible position. One would have thought if there was some sort of work share or power sharing arrangement or delegation structure where she could spend time at home and be less public and be stripped of some of her extraneous functions.
Well, what are they trying to say? So why can't they just have somebody step in for
her? Well, I mean, they could, yes, if they want to.
But like a normal pregnant person who's working, then just wouldn't that be?
Yeah, I know, but it's not like politics is a dirty business, The absent, what did les absents sont toujours tort. The absent are always wrong. Oh dear, I hear you stepped down from maternity leave. Minister for Justice becomes 3 months later. Oh, well, we've got a Minister for Justice now. We don't need it. We don't need you to come back. Here's fisheries. So I suspect, from her point of view, there might be an element of that in it as well.
Well, but the position is kind of cosmetic anyway. I mean, she's not making the decisions as such. It's whoever will take her place won't either. So it's
I think the decisions have been made by others.
Of course. Well, I always thought that, but
well, I think when you had a kind of iron Minister for Justice like MacDougall, I'd say he made quite a few decisions, right or wrong, but I wouldn't classify her as that.
No, I don't think. But I mean. Yeah,
no, but you're right. The decisions are being made.
I would have thought. Yeah, I mean, she's there to present.
By her bosses in government, and they're being made by a different cohort of people. One would have thought, and the Department of Justice.
Well, it's.
She acts under their advice.
Yeah, as we saw through the Wolf thing, really. Her position on the Wolf thing wasn't a personal decision. It wasn't like she had come to this decision herself, and
that was
you don't want to go there but that's fine.
No, I'll say this: it's always a case of not the office, but who's in the office.
Yeah.
In terms of their ability to be independent. It's the person, not the office.
Yeah. In this case, though, it's a tricky area for you, I guess. So I won't.
Well,
it's your industry, I guess. So.
Well, yeah.
So the horse trainer Elliot, he's suspended. He got a £15,000 fine and 6 months suspension.
Yeah, breaching the rules of the jockey club, isn't that right? And
No.
he's accepted it, hasn't he? He said
He said, "I'll build back better," which is the slogan of the day.
I haven't heard that phrase.
You haven't heard "build back better"? Well,
No.
every from Trudeau to I think even Varadkar, this is the phrase of the moment.
Yeah, I try and avoid cliches in my life and the expression of cliches. I try to avoid them if at all possible. For example, Martin saying, as you said earlier, meeting the vaccine target will be highly challengeable. That's double speak. You know, it's apotheosis, is of course Donald Rumsfeld's famous. There are the known knowns, the known unknowns, and the unknown knowns. And politicians don't just speak in forked tongue; they speak in bland advertising soundbites. And I try and avoid that. I have a hatred of cliche.
Here it says he's got a 12-month ban from horse racing, so I don't know whether it's 6 months or 12 months. Varadkar hails suspension of EU-US tariffs. The globalists are back in a big way. The Echo, stay away from rally. This is what you were talking about.
Well, that's what Coveney and the Lord Mayor are saying. I suspect it'll be pusillanimous, full of sound and fury and signifying nothing. I think there'll be a significant turnout in Cork. If I know Cork people at all, despite what their political masters will say, they will be there, and it will involve everybody. And I encourage everyone, if they are going to be peaceful, civil disobedience is always best dealt with in the Gandhi King sense of the term of peaceful civil disobedience. You make your point more forcefully and more nobly when you not react or precipitate the situation.
I know, but David, you get a bunch of guys.
Yes, exactly.
Intent on whatever, like the firework person.
Yeah, and the problem is everybody else gets then tarred with the same brush, and the police.
The guards move in. Yeah, and then. But for instance, I was saying the other night that I had a friend who went to the rally last Saturday.
Yeah,
he wasn't even aware of what had happened at Grafton Street until he went home. He went with the march. He had a great day. You know, they went to the GPO.
Yes, but there's also the other phenomenon that you're caught in the crossfire. You know,
yeah,
and you're not part of that which creates the disturbance, but you are in the middle of the vortex. And when there's
the whole thing gets blamed,
innocent people like stray or dummy bullets in Bloody Sunday, innocent people even children can get affected. So it is a very tricky situation.
Well, perhaps we're overstating it, maybe.
Well, perhaps we are, but certainly the snapshot and selection from last week's thing in Grafton Street in microcosm, and I agree it doesn't represent what happened, was deeply concerning. And if there is now a pattern of all of this, well, then we are dealing with a change in the culture at one level.
There's
the frequency of demonstrations,
the IRA
and the pattern nature of it.
Okay, the IRA supporter at the heart of Fleet Street. That's Roy Greenslade.
Yeah, no, I've been following that with.
I suppose David, it makes a change that he's not an MI5. I mean, you know, or he's not a supporter of the British intelligence agencies. I mean, there's so many plants in the British or agents or assets. It's a novel change, I guess.
Well, yeah, I mean, he's obviously been crucified by elements of the British establishment and press. It's a very sore and complex issue at all levels. I mean,
well, is it though? I mean, you know,
but it's also historic. That's the point. I mean, I think if he had said this 20 years ago, the repercussions would be for him personally absolutely disastrous.
Completely.
Saying it now, appeasing, conscience-driven, confessional, is a time that he can say it without a fear of a disproportionate response, even though he has in certain quarters been vilified for it. And I mean, I suppose it's generational. It's a very sore issue for people of a certain age. and who were victims of.
Yeah.
You know, I mean,
it's very difficult for anybody to. It would be difficult for anybody after Enniskillen to defend, you know, to be British and to witness or to after Enniskillen to be still, you know, supportive of the IRA.
Indeed, indeed. And if you look at, I was in Chambers in London as a pupil, and the legendary Caesar Crespi, who was one of the great barristers and the model for the Rumpole of the Bailey books,
Right.
who was about 24 stone. He was caught in the middle of the Brighton bombings. And now he was dead when I joined the Timbers. He just died. But it was simply his girth and his size that prevented him. It's a very, for people who remember that, it's difficult to have any measure of empathy in relation to it. So for people who remember or empathize with that, it's difficult.
Do you have to go?
Yeah, no, I'm being. It's a peremptory. I have to go here. Yeah. Sorry, altering briefly. Dogs and other things have arrived. Yeah. So, but the point is, you cannot condone some of the actions undertaken by the IRA, and you know there is an over-sentimentalized, narrow Irish attitude towards this, and British people are often a model of tolerance. But once you have situations like the Brighton bombings in Enniskillen, particularly Enniskillen, because Enniskillen was murder in a way. But this is the past. I think we are in a universe where we're trying to at least appease, control, and tolerate, and come to terms with our history in both the islands. And it's not that those issues are not the preeminent issues of our age. I wouldn't say they've been completely put to bed or resolved, but they are issues of which a broad measure of compromise and tolerance is now broken out on. And they are certainly not the issues that affect everybody, Catholic, Protestant, all nationalities, all ethnic groups, of the effect of the pandemic on our economic survivability and the liberties of everybody.
Yeah.
So he is putting an issue to bed from a safe vantage point.
He lives in Ireland as well, I gather. So
yeah. Well, people are products. The other thing is people are products of their experiences. And who's to know where you were, what you would have reacted to that at the time. But it is odd many years later. Yeah.
Travel permits to stop Easter holidays abroad in Britain, David. Passengers
there
on essential business.
I'd imagine there'll be uproar about that. I can't see the minute a safe route to France opens up, I can't see the Brits not migrating en masse for the summer holidays. I really can't, unless they're put under the most severe restrictions. And no doubt there will be a good old row about this, and the good old row will lead to various perspectives and compromises. But of course, all of this is subject to whether and to what extent the virus doesn't get worse again. And suddenly it doesn't seem to be under control in Europe at the moment. And there's still massive travel embargoes in all European countries. So whether they're allowed exit, the question becomes, can they enter?
Right.
But these are, I mean, I do think we've entered a world now where the concept of free and cheap and easy travel is not going to be a part of most people's futures.
Prince Philip's
Yes, I do want to say something about the nurses' strike. I don't like tokenism at all. A miserly pay rise for NHS workers, and yet all this symbolic, let's have a clap and pat you on the back stuff. I remember I had somebody working, which may be an article I'm going to write for you, in my Innocence Project in Dublin, and she'd raised a huge amount of money for a major international conference, a bit like Babette's Feast. She had prepared it brilliantly, and she had, all she wanted was an office manager's job, and it was well within the college's budgetary constraints to do so. They didn't give it to her. The money was forgotten about, and she was presented with some roses in the conference. There is a devaluation going on in terms of certain types of work in our culture. And when you're dealing with people involved in the public service, such as nurses and doctors, they're underpaid for the enormous work they do. We don't appreciate it, and we don't pay them properly. And the pay rise is utterly miserly and tokenistic, given the dangers that they have to face. And again, it's part of the decadence and the dehumanization, disproportionality of the culture, that people who are what Bob Dylan would call the early Roman kings, the bankers, are paid ridiculous amounts of money, and people who are actually providing proper service are not.
The 1%, it's such a, I mean, that particular number or something, it just seems such an insult.
It is adding insult.
Just didn't give them nothing, like, you know what I mean? Like, well, what's the point? What is it? You know, it just seems
well, yeah, exactly.
Derisory, you know.
Yeah.
Brexit barriers hit UK-Europe trade flows. Barcelona is on the brink. Huge scandal here with Barcelona Football Club. This is the Racing Post cover, David, in response to the Elliot standing on or sitting on a dead horse.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, I'm not a horse person, but I know a lot of people who are, and their horses are near and dear to them. And you know, it is, I think, the case that if people are close to their pets and horses, it often is an attribution of a softness in them as a human being in terms of their attitude towards other people. And I know one person who's like that, who's staring at me now about horses. So I think it's a lovely picture.
Yeah, gorgeous picture. David, you've disappeared again. David, you've disappeared. I can't see you. No.
Right, should be there now.
Should be there now, yeah. Should be there, David.
But it's not.
But it's not. Okay.
Oh, here we go. I see you. I don't know if I see me.
We don't see you. And this is, I'm not. This is the Star cover. I'm not giving them a decent pay rise, but do you think they'd settle for another clap? There we you're
back. I'm back. Yeah, I'm almost like floating in and out. I don't know whether I've got a new computer and I think it's acting up. Yeah, I mean, again, it's the same point. Short memories is very important. You know, the world, broken bread is soon forgotten. You know, pat you in the back, give you a medal, and get out. Compassion has to be always mediated with remedial actions. They deserve a significant pay rise. They should be put on a priority to do so. I agree with you. It is almost like a further form of degradation, such a miserly pay rise. Given there's a hospital worker who lives close by, and at the heights of the crisis, he has been working double shifts, utterly frazzled, looks totally exhausted coming home in the evenings with a family to cope with as well, with family. So, you know, it's just not on.
Yeah. Particularly as Johnson was cared for by NHS staff, wasn't he? Didn't you get it?
Well, that's my point. In the short-term reactive universe of the selfishness of the powerful, they expect things to be done for them, but not to do unto others. They're not good at the Aristotelian justice-driven principle, or is it St. Thomas Aquinas and even Christian, do unto others as you would do them as they wish to do unto you. They're not good at
that. Is Doug okay? I just want to go back to the protest today, David, in Cork. The policing of today's anti-lockdown protest in Cork City will be a showcase of how Garda will deal with the expected mass protest in Dublin on St. Patrick's Day. They're going to, if there's any violence or criminal damage, it will be dealt with. They've also said there will be enough Garda on duty to nip anything in the bud. Garda sources said that as it stands, the threat level is very low and that there's no indication of violence However, they are conscious that Garda also had no prior warnings of violence before last week's. Yeah. So.
Well, I mean, I don't like the last line at all. It has been a hallmark. I mean, now, you know, the police are out of control in Ireland, as we all know. Corrupt, framing people left, right, and centre. The last thing we need to do is give them weapons.
Well, there's that, and also just before the march last week, they looked kind of paramilitary. You know, they looked very tooled up.
Well, yeah. I mean, there was very ugly eviction pictures in the last couple of months with their balaclavas in the north side of Dublin participating. Once the police turn into a paramilitary force, particularly when they associate with people like that, we are the police state anyway. I think for all sorts of reasons. When people talk about showcasing things, I don't think it's something necessarily to be applauded. Yes, it is important to have a plan, but it's almost like a test or a dummy run for something that they're going to implement in future, and that is very concerning.
Yeah. Jacques Hughes, then your column yesterday on the site was just like everything. You know, you just threw out everything but the kitchen sink.
Well, I've been. Let me explain a bit of the context for it. I don't know if you have it ready there or not, but and I just want to dampen a little bit. Your readership loves some of my pieces that are light serious, if I can put it like that. This was deadly serious, and the response has been much better than my other deadly serious piece, the Weimar Republic piece I published for you. But it is, or the Modest Proposal one, but it is something I've written many years ago, and I've redrafted several times. And I wouldn't quite go as far as to say last will and testament or anything like that, but it is a summing up of everything that has gone wrong in Ireland, certainly since 2008 and probably earlier. And it is really quite clear now that assumptions fear about Britain turning into a Chinese corporate capitalist state is absolutely true about Ireland. And we have neglected, above all else, poverty, inequality, homelessness, with many people being pushed out onto the streets, with the triumph of vulture funds, with the funneling, this alleged growth is a mystique. The growth has gone out of the country largely to enrich Canadian American corporate interests and other people, and growth has been narrowly corralled to the top accountancy and law firms. It hasn't trickled down, and we're a society of pervasive and greater structural inequality. Austerity as a model has been a disaster and doesn't work, and all the evidence indicates that. But there seems what despairs me is there seems no political will within the established parties to do anything about this. And certainly Fine Gael are never going to do anything about it, because any sense of Christian compassion that they had historically, the Declan Costello, Gareth Fitzgerald era, has now dissipated into the neoliberal mindset, and they merely pay lip service to that legacy and are not concerned about Costello's concept of a just society. They've written about Declan Costello in Standard Voices. And Fianna Fáil have not at all got any level of empathy any longer with their Lamass socialist roots of the late 60s, or at least compassion roots of the late 60s. So one doesn't see any attempts to redress a situation that is spiraling out of control, and with COVID will get worse, particularly when eviction moratoriums are lifted. And there is no regulation of the housing or property market. And then if you add to that other things that are going wrong, mentioned the police, the tolerance of the fact that the Irish police are in effect a bandit organisation. When you have the alleged gatekeepers of the system running their training college as a casino and a money laundering operation, when you have them systematically framing people by blowing into a tube in the police station for drunk driving to up conviction rates, when you have framing people and setting people up for child sex abuse charges as a policy of the state, then I think there is something absolutely so rotten to the core morally in that. Now, Varadkar, in fairness to him, leaning over backwards, to be fair, has emphasized the dysfunctionality of the Department of Justice, and I think he knows, as I know, how awful they are. But the COVID crisis allows them to further empower people who are at this stage. The tram lines are so blurred, no different in many respects, or the same as the people they go off to.
I think, like, as you point out in the piece, that the Charlton Tribunal for me certainly was a benchmark. Not a benchmark.
It was a disgrace, is what it is. I mean, it was a disgrace, and it shows how state criminals got off scot-free.
Pretty much.
And how whistleblowers who had to fight for their lives got settlements to keep them quiet. And the Irish solution is to paper up, lie about the truth, cover up, and in the process, lives have been destroyed.
It all seemed very choreographed, the tribunal. I mean, it all seemed kind of quite almost scripted to a point. David, we've run out of time.
It's a collusion of interest within but that is only yet another thing. I think there has also been
there's been
other things that are going wrong that are even more disturbing. We're breeding a mindlessly uncritical generation who are not standing up for the rights the way they should be. Our educational system has become a corporate education system, which is breeding people for business. We're losing the sense of civility of the humanist liberal intelligence, and liberalism has been replaced by kind of designer falsetto liberalism of lifestyle issues at the expense of structural issues of poverty, healthcare, quality of life, and we're losing a sense of community, of Christian or socialist compassion. And so it's a summation of a lot of things. Now, I just want to say this.
Okay.
I used Émile Zola's famous letter on the Dreyfus affair as a template. So some of the language might be because I wanted to evoke that. Yes. The point about it is, some people might regard it as polemical. I can write very unpolemical pieces if I want to, or very light pieces if I want to, or very matter-of-fact pieces. But if you don't see the necessity, as someone pointed out in my modest proposal piece, which was well received, that occasionally the howl of polemical outrage in a literary form is a necessary method of communication to highlight in stark terms the awfulness and the freefall. That was, and it becomes more effective that way. And none of it is untrue. There's not a word that's untrue. We are far too, this whole notion of comely maidens dancing at the crossroads and this board falter touristic image we present to the outside world has masked over state infamy, whole-scale corruption, the country run in a dynastic way by a narrow band of people, often from the inherited families, to the obliteration of everybody else. And now we've reached the point that we are very close to being a corporate fascist state, if we are not there already, and we're very close to being a police state.
Okay, but
that is not extremism to say that. That is merely an assertion of moderate conservatism, moderate liberal socialism. The search for the middle ground has been lost, and as a society,
it's not the full picture. It's not the full picture. It's not the full picture in the sense that the Irish, certainly the people I've dealt with on the site over 10 years, there's a lot more fight in them. It's just finding a way to resist.
The problem has, and I agree with that. Sorry.
You can't go onto the street and just get whacked.
My attack was on official Ireland. It wasn't on the plain people of Ireland.
Yeah, no, but I'm saying in the profit ledger, we've got what we have is, that is there.
But it's like a spectator democracy. We've got all these brilliant critical people who either approve or tear of my articles to pieces on your site, but they're not empowered people, and they can't seem to channel their energies into. They're disenchanted with the party political structure. There isn't a cohesive NGO And they feel that they are spectators in their own lives in terms of power and engagement. And that is because, of course, what Habermas would call the public sphere is getting less and less, and has been replaced by the market. And most people, when they've got to struggle to survive, they can read an article or two in broadsheet, comment about it. And you're right, there is a great silent majority of people in Ireland who are hyper brilliant, hyper articulate, but they are disempowered. And it is a tragedy. It is a generational tragedy. It's a multi-generational tragedy at this stage, that we are not taking care of developing our people and bring the best people into public service and public life and paying them properly and developing structures of communitarian associational ties where there is real rather than fabricated change. There is no doubt we have a wealth of talent of all ages. It's just not represented in public life in Ireland or in official Ireland.
Certainly, yeah. And official Ireland has got bigger. It's got bigger, and since kind of the early 90s when the phrase was coined, it's got bigger but smaller in a way, bigger but more exclusive, you know, or bigger but harder.
Yeah, it's like the country is run like a club. The Law Library, I think, captures that reasonably well. There are a few powerful barristers and they control all the work themselves. They allow you in on their terms. That is true of the political classes. And often some of them are a bit like the Night of the Living Dead or Shadows and Fogs. They're working behind the scenes. You might not know who they are. Some of the top academics, some of the top civil servants, they all know each other.
Yeah.
A lot of them made money in the 70s and 80s when they were able to build nice houses for very little. They're holding on to their privileges, and the cartel is there, and they admit people into the cartel in accordance with what they can do for them and how much money they can invest. And that has led to the disempowerment of the real talent of Ireland, the artistic talent, the creative talent, the visionary talent, talent of hardworking people. I mean, I'm a great believer in the fact that, you know, and I can be very sensitive to personal criticism, but the sheer wit and ingenuity with which people criticize some of my pieces for broadsheet does give me a kick up the arse.
Yeah, well, that's David. Yeah, that's pretty much what I'm sort of talking about. There's a huge, as you say, an ingenuity. There's a wit. There's a and it's in there. It's as you say. But it's waiting for an opportunity, and you know, maybe.
Well, the concluding lines of J'accuse by Dreyfus are: "You may bury the truth underground, but the truth rises up. Truth comes back to the fore.
Yeah.
The truth is ever watchful. The truth is a very powerful weapon."
Well, on that bombshell, we shall just say goodbye. David, thank you for getting me up early.
Yes, I'll make sure my fancy new computer it doesn't have me a bit like the stakeholders of Ireland fading in and out of the shadow and fogs for the next occasion.
Okay, get your camera sorted. Okay, see you next week. Okay.